Ephesians 4:26 and 27. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Good morning. Good morning. Paul tells us, in your anger, do not sin. How many of you, don't show me your hands. How many of you have ever, in frustration, said something or did something that you wish you hadn't later? I'm going to venture to guess that most of us have. Somewhere in our lives, in our anger, we have sinned and done something or said something we shouldn't have. Paul says, don't do this. But he says instead, do not let the sun go down until you resolve the problem. How many of you have ever heard the old saying, don't go to bed angry? Of course you have. There's a lot of truth to that. I would venture to guess that if you have gone to bed angry, whether it's with your spouse or something at work or whatever it may be, that you didn't sleep very well. That you lay there and you tossed and turned, and maybe that anger started to change in you. Last week, we were discussing and we were sharing from Colossians and from Romans, and Paul tells us, he says, we've got to rid ourselves of anger, rage, malice, and slander. Because these are the things we must rid ourselves of. And so I got to looking, and I looked them up in the order in which he had printed them in Colossus last week. And anger is an emotion that we feel. We become angry in our hearts and in our minds. We become angry. Then he used the word rage. Rage is now anger turned to some form of violence, which either comes in the form of malice, and malice being thoughts of violent acts or acting out those anger in a violent way, or slander, which is where we're just bad-mouthing people. This starts to happen when we go to bed at night angry. When we harbor anger, these thoughts start to form. And that's where when Paul says, do not give the devil a foothold, was what he was talking about. When you keep harboring anger, these other thoughts start to develop. And before you know it, you're losing sleep, you're short with people, you're kicking the cat when you walk out of the house in the morning. Whatever it may be. I looked it up, and there was 6 or 7 things that anger creates and does to your body. The first 2 is if you are angry and you blow up at somebody and you just go off on them. It says you're twice as likely to have a heart attack and 3 times as likely to have a stroke for up to the next 2 hours. Twice as likely and 3 times as likely. So if you already have those issues in your life and you get mad at somebody, get ready, your old ticker may kick out. Long-term anger causes things as depression. It causes your immune system to be less efficient. Lung issues, cardiovascular issues, and generally shortens your lifespan for harboring a life of anger. Those are some scary thoughts. So what's the answer? Paul tells us in Ephesians, the 32nd verse, he says, be compassionate with one another instead. Forgive one another as Christ has forgiven you. Instead of being angry, show compassion. I was studying on this, and it says the first thing we need to do when somebody does something to us is to forgive them here. As Christians, even though our initial attitude is retaliation and angry thoughts and whatever, first thing we need to do is forgive them here. Matthew 18 tells us then when we've been sinned against, then once we've calmed down, we're to go to those people and hope for reconciliation. Later on, then, when you work things out, you apologize to them or you forgive them for whatever is needed. But the first thing we do is forgive them here. And that's not easy to do. And I'm sure you're going, yeah, Matt, but... Well, I'm not making this up. It's here in the Bible. In Matthew 18, there's a story. It's the story of the king and a couple of servants. And what it amounted to was that one day this king, he decided, he goes, you know what, I'm going to clear the books. I'm going to get all my money brought in. I'm going to level my books up. So he goes out and he finds this servant. One who owes him 10,000 talents. 10,000 talents. I did some research on that. That is like having, they said at the current rate at that time, it would take 150 years to pay off that kind of money. So it's an unfathomable amount of money. And this king goes up to this servant. He says, you owe me this money. So I'm going to throw you in prison, and I'm going to sell your wife and your children. And that was legal at that time. If you owed somebody money and you did not pay it, they had the legal right to throw you in jail in hopes that you would go ahead and pay it, or that your family would pay it to get you out. And if not, you sat there. They also have the right to take your properties and sell your wife and your children as property. So the king says, this is what I'm going to do to you. You're going to jail. I'm going to sell your family. And the servant pleaded with him, Lord, give me time. Give me another chance. I'll make it right. The king was convinced. And he says, you know what? Your heart and everything. He says, you know what? I'm going to wipe the slate clean. You're forgiven. Your debt is paid. Go on. Today I'm granting you mercy. So the servant left. And he went out and he was wandering along and he comes across somebody that owes him money. 100 denarii. I think a day's wages at that time was 1 denarii, so 100 days worth of wages. And he goes up to him and he grabs this servant and says, you owe me money. And he says, give me time. And he says, no. And he just throws him in jail. And the king hears about this. And he goes back out to this servant. And he says, what are you doing? What are you doing? I just showed you mercy and love. I wiped out your debt. 10,000 talents, a debt you could never repay. And yet, this man who owed you very little in comparison, you threw him into jail? How dare you not show the forgiveness and the mercy that I showed you? He had him taken away and tortured. The Scriptures tells us, so this will be with us, with God, when we act in that way. You see, the king, of course, in the story is God. The first servant who owed the unfathomable debt is you and I. Our debt, what we owed for our sinful lives prior to our salvation. A debt that we could not pay on our own. But yet Christ came into our lives as Christians and He says, I'll pay that debt. I'll wipe your slate clean. I'll shed my blood for you. But yet then at times we're like that first servant, aren't we? And we go out and we let something that has been said or done to us grow and bastardize until we now have rage. And we have anger and frustration. We think malicious thoughts and we slander people. God's not happy when we do that. Mark tells us when Jesus was talking with his disciples and talking about the power of prayer through Christ and that we can ask of anything in God's will and it will be done because of not what we do, but because of God. But he says, but I tell you this, when you're standing before God and you're praying, and you have not forgiven someone, God will not forgive you. Let that sink in. If you are holding anger and not showing forgiveness in your heart first, this is what he's talking about. If you're not forgiving people and you're going before God and you're going, God, you know, I really need some help with this, that, or the other, but you're hanging on to this anger over here, God says, no. He's not going to take your salvation. You're promised that. But what he's going to do is hold back the blessings. It's kind of like if your child throws a baseball through the window, then comes into the house and just goes, hey, how about we go to town and get ice cream? You're not going to do that, are you? No, he just did something wrong and he showed no remorse or anything about it. There was no same thing here. God says, I'm going to hold the blessings back until your heart is right. Until your heart is right. He says, what I did on the cross was so great, and the debt that you owed was so great that you could never pay it. But yet you hold such petty things against people. You slander people. Gossips. You say harsh things. And then there are the acts of violence that we see in this world. Anger is so devastating. It's splitting churches, it's splitting families, it's splitting communities. The last 2 weeks I've talked with multitudes of people, from pastors and educators and just people in general. And you wouldn't believe the things that I'm hearing. It's just like there's a blanket of anger over this area. If we're not careful, it's going to destroy us. God says the answer is show compassion. Grant forgiveness. Matthew tells us that Peter went before the Lord and he said, Lord, how many times do I forgive somebody? 7? But you see, at that time, the rabbis taught that 3 times was enough to forgive somebody before you could wash their hands of it. So Peter, knowing that, goes to God, he's going to double that up. 7 times, God, is that being pretty good? The King James Version, Jesus replies, no, I tell you, 70 times 7. In other words, you don't keep track. You just keep forgiving. Now you're going, I don't know. How many times have you sinned? How many times have you gone before God? If he's not keeping count, who are we to keep count? It's pretty quiet in here today. It should be. We've all fallen short of God's glory. But God says, you know what? You can start over again. Because I forgive you. You can leave here today and go, you know what? Things haven't been going right. So you can start to search your heart and see where that anger is at. Who am I mad at? Who am I frustrated at? How do I correct this? It starts here and then it goes outward. We've all heard it said, when you can't sleep at night, you count sheep, right? I titled today's message, Can't Sleep? Try granting forgiveness. When you're laying there and you can't sleep and things are going astray, check your hearts. Start granting forgiveness. Amen? Amen. Let us pray. Lord, as we leave your house today, Lord, let us leave the anger here, the frustrations here. Lord, let us be able to grant that forgiveness. As you have forgiven us, let us forgive those who have brought hostilities and harm to us as well, Lord, that we may share in your blessings. Let us clear our hearts and our minds of evil thoughts, that we may live a life for you. Be with us now, Lord, as we go forth. Watch over us through this week. Let us be beacons for you. Let us share our faith with one another. Let our lives demonstrate it even greater. And it is in your name we ask all of these things. And all the people said, Amen.